And so now, as I listen to what's happening in Ukraine, and this is my opinion, it's not the opinion of the administration, it's not the opinion of the next administration coming in, but for those folks in Ukraine that are fighting against a Russian aggression that we can all see, I just feel so frustrated that we have not been able to provide them all of the equipment that they need and all of the weapon systems that they need in order to respond to absolute tyranny coming from Russia, a neighbor who has absolutely unjustly invaded their country. And it's been done after a time in which Russia was one of the guarantors of their safety from 1994 when they gave up the nuclear weapons that they had. And they did it because they thought that all of us would defend them in that decision. And now here we are, this many years later, with Putin, the aggressor, looking at us as literally hundreds of thousands of his own people die on the front line as cannon fodder. And as he inflicts huge, huge amounts of damage and destruction in a neighbor, an innocent neighbor, who wanted peace. And I wonder why we haven't done more and more quickly than what we have. All of us. The United States has put in over $46 billion in direct aid to Ukraine already. But what we have offered is our treasure, not our blood. Ukraine has offered not just everything they have, and to have this fight on their own homeland, but they have offered the blood of their own kids. And in fact, if you take a look at what's happened, they have had the older men going so that the younger ones can have a life. Mm-hmm. It's not easy to be logical when the emotions are that strong that I think all of us feel in the defense of freedom of a democracy against a tyrant. The Biden administration has stood strong, but I have been frustrated with their slow response in many ways to provide the necessary resources as being afraid of escalating and actually causing more damage in Ukraine and elsewhere. And I understand that. But folks, it's time to take a hard look at this thing and really ask ourselves, do you believe that this tyrant, if you offer him a part of a free country, do you think he's going to stop?
No.
Or do you think he's going to have to go back home and say, you see, when we stand strong, the weak, the West, these people who are decadent, do you think for 1 second he's going to turn around and walk back in and say, but we most certainly have our freedom now, that we've been defended by this and that we have everything we need? Or do you think he's going to look at that and say, you see, we're strength, we're Russian strength? See, I think that's what happens. I think the best thing in the world that we can do is make our commitment to Ukraine, allow them to participate in deciding whether or not victory is actually achieved, and whether or not Russia would continue to support a tyrant as the body bags continue to come home. I wish I could say there was an easy way out. There is not. And while the vast majority of all wars end with a peace treaty, it didn't happen in Germany. It didn't happen in Japan. I fear, as much as I would love to say that there is a path towards a peaceful resolution to this by negotiating with this tyrant, I suspect that we may be deceiving ourselves. And if that is the case, then let me just ask a question right now. As America, we spend over $850 billion a year in our defense budget. $850 billion a year. We are $36 trillion in debt. We are spending $1.4 to $1.7 trillion more every single year than what we take in. But let me just ask this as a close. And I ask it in your own countries. Ask yourselves this: which is truly more expensive? To spend perhaps 10% more on the defense of your own country and in creating the supply chains for the munitions that you need and the superior weapon systems that you need so that you don't perhaps be perceived as being weak and end up in a world war? Or do we sit back and hope that what we've done is okay and that the tyrants of the world look at us and say, I've got enough? Or are they going to look at us and say, it's worth a risk? Let's challenge them. Perhaps we are stronger than them, at which time we enter into one war, one single war. Because if we ever do, any world war on more than one front, and we already know if we go on a war in one front, we're going to be on a war in two fronts at the same time. Do you measure that in billions, or do you measure that in trillions? And that's if we win. I think we pay the insurance premium. We pay it by making damn sure that we are not only perceived as being the strongest, but we are the strongest without doubt. That's the way. That's the way you make sure that your young men and women aren't spreading their blood in Europe or elsewhere in the next few years.
Okay.
That was Senator Mike Rounds from South Dakota, Republican from South Dakota, speaking at the Halifax International Security Summit. I believe it was just this last weekend, if I remember correctly. And I initially tried to cut that down from the 7-ish minutes that it was. I just couldn't. Partway through there, you hear the emotion in his voice as he speaks about this, speaks about the old men being sent to war so that his younger generation could have a chance at a life. That's the type of fighting Ukraine is doing. They're not fighting for glory or honor or imperial ambition. They're fighting for survival. And they know if they send their youngest to war, they may not have a future worth holding on to. As I don't remember the exact quote, so I'm going to be paraphrasing here. At the height of the Battle of Britain, Chamberlain was asked, why do we let people do things like these plays and this cultural events and art and all these other types of things? Why do we do that? We're at war. We shouldn't be doing those things. We shouldn't be funding those things right now. And his response, again, paraphrased because I'm going from memory, came down to, if we're not fighting for that, what are we fighting for? You cannot allow your nation to die to cling on to mere survival. You cannot allow your culture to be crushed in favor of just the survival of borders. So Ukraine is fighting for more than just land. They're fighting for cultural survival in an era of strong men using force to get their way. And that's my thoughts on Senator Rounds' comments today. We've got a lot to cover and a ton of things to address. And I wish I could hit all of them right off the bat. From Eurasia Center here, let me get this pulled up. if Ukraine is forced to cede land to Russia in exchange for peace, Vladimir Putin's entire invasion will be legitimized, and his imperial appetite will only grow. Absolutely. That's the problem here. Yes, he might have to sit back and lick his wounds and try and rebuild the army that can take the next phase on, but make no mistake, rebuild he will. And he will come for us in a decade, 15 years. It may not even be Vladimir Putin who does it, but he will set the stage for the next leader of Russia to say, Vladimir Putin expanded our borders. He added hundreds or thousands of square kilometers of land. Clearly, the West is weak. Therefore, we should strike, and we should take back what's ours. Never do they say they're taking a territory from somebody else. Oh, no. They are taking back what is ours. We had it before. We had it after World War II, they should say. So obviously, we deserve this land. This is our land. There is no Ukraine. There is no culture. There is nothing there. There is just Russia. And that's where those imperial ambitions will survive and thrive if they are rewarded now. Classic situation of don't feed the bears because they'll become dependent. Well, if we feed the dictators, they'll become dependent on that war to be able to keep advancing and keep their people in check. Joe Rogan made some rather disparaging remarks a couple of days ago. It did not go over well for those who are in support of Ukraine. I don't have the time to play this entire video. It's from the Kyiv Independent. I will just drop the link here to the video on Reddit because that's the only place I found it in the few minutes I had to research. Suffice to say that Joe Rogan screamed about Joe Biden allowing Ukraine to use ATACMS missiles on Russian territory, yelling about him starting World War III, etc., etc., etc. And Ukrainian people saw this and gave their reactions, which were universally negative to his response. Joe Rogan used to be actually pretty negative about Vladimir Putin, saying he was a gangster and that Russia is an incredibly suppressive place. That was Joe Rogan back in 2014. But again, in 2024, Joe Rogan, well, the word is that he's got some pretty deep Russia ties himself. Now, I'm not going to say that's true or not. I'm just going to say that's what the word is. But either way, he has bitten on to this concept that Ukraine is wrong and that they should surrender to Russia. Bunch of people called him out on that. Prominent Ukrainians, including the former professional boxer Vladimir Klitschko, I'm not sure I said that correct, and Foreign Minister Dmytro Kuleba have publicly condemned Rogan's statements. In fact, I believe this is actually the direct link to that video. I'm just going to drop it as well. Yeah, Joe Rogan is not necessarily known for his great takes on things, Ozzy, absolutely. The problem with a lot of conspiracy theorists is that they get right once, and so they believe they're right about everything. And Joe Rogan thinks he's hit on that. So a lot of people are pushing back on it. As Kyiv Independent states, Rogan's podcast misses the point. When discussing a nation's fight for survival, it's not about bold opinions. It's about listening to the voices of those who are living the reality. And that's the long and the short of it. The people of Ukraine must have their voices heard. Now, Robbie and I had a nice long conversation about that just the other day. People are probably getting really tired of it. They want the war to end. Question is, under what circumstances are they willing to allow that war to end? And maybe I misread the situation. Maybe there is more to it. All I'm going to say is that the people that were spoken to by the Kyiv Independent absolutely were not in favor of suddenly calling a mulligan and saying, oh yeah, we're just going to surrender now. They're asking for a real conversation. So quite a few Ukrainians have now pitched to Joe Rogan that they should have them on to actually talk about the situation with Ukraine. I encourage Joe Rogan to do so. If you don't listen to the other side, you never know where your actual feelings should be. So, absolutely, I encourage him to do so. Then out of Russia, well, we try to give Russia the, I don't know, benefit of the doubt in many cases. This is Russia's news media mocking world leaders showing up to this G20 summit. This is just, it's not even just petty. It's disgusting. It's horrible. And the thing is, we see the same thing starting to happen over here as well. Starting, I think it's been going on for a long time. But this is Russians showing how Russia truly are. And I'm not going to play this thing for you. It's just, again, I got a bunch of stuff I want to talk about. A lot of it's more important than this stuff right here, but these are just kind of a few things to get things rolling as we get started. Now, I've kind of started looking at Peace Watch, is what I'm calling it right now. And the thought process there was Donald Trump promised to end the Ukraine war within 24 hours of successfully being elected to office again. That deadline has obviously long since passed. But overall, the word on the streets have been getting pretty crazy about it. One of the things is Russia's categorically rejected any options for freezing the conflict in Ukraine. We all talk about, we freeze it here. That's all we need in order to be able to put together a peace deal, is we freeze the conflict here. We stop it where the lines are right now. Russia doesn't want that. Russia doesn't want it at all. They will pay lip service to the idea of doing so, but they will not actually accept that as the situation, because they still need to get their 4 oblasts that they want to capture, because they've already put it in their constitution that those are Russian. And they're not stopping until they've got those 4 at the minimum. They got plenty more requirements for what they want to be able to pull off here that they're demanding, and so they're not going to accept that position there. The Russian propagandists have even been saying that they're going to strike European countries' plants and military bases. They're not going to warn the civilians because they're not our civilians. So obviously, they're not civilians. And it's just, this is the Russian mindset overall here, is that we must destroy anything that opposes us. Compare that to the U.S. We've got so many enemies that you could write out an entire encyclopedia just of our enemies. And yet we aren't over there destroying all of them. Iran still chants death to America constantly. And yet we're not over there messing with them. We're letting Israel do that. That's another topic, though. BBC Russian did talk about the war seeming to escalate again. They were talking about the missile strike that Russia pulled off with their Oreshnik missile, which turns out to be a new type of missile. Originally, I said it was an ICBM or an IRBM. The IRBM is what it turned out to be, an intermediate range ballistic missile. That's based on one of their ICBM designs, the RS-26, intended for shorter range. So overall, that's the escalation. Now, the Ukrainians have been responding with ATACMS missiles in various places. There's a new attack on Crimea, Belbek Airfield, I believe is what it is. And we'll talk about that in a little bit. But overall, Russia's positions have changed, but they have not moderated in any significant degree. Ukraine's has moderated to some degrees, but even so, the read I keep getting is that they cannot accept the loss of territory. For one thing, it's their people that are being oppressed by Russians over there. So they cannot accept that their own people are going to be relegated to living under Russian rule. And that's where I think things start to get really difficult for both sides. Let's go into news out of Ukraine. Russians launched an airstrike on Sumy. 2 people dead and another under the rubble, potentially. This is kind of more of the normal status of how Russia fights this war. They hit areas that are just civilian. Odessa here, a flower shop and a cafe. There was an attack recently that hit nearby, and you can see the results of that attack through the security cameras of these facilities. Again, this is just a continuous deal. More on Odessa here with 6 injured, 1 in serious condition. Residential buildings, a school, and a university gym were damaged. I'm certain that university was so militarized that Russia had to strike it, as always. The thing is that Russia does not want intellectuals. In fact, they had to put together a kill list of people that were to be killed when they showed up. Among them, intellectuals, school teachers, those who taught the Ukrainian language, government officials, etc., etc., etc. That they're intending to have be killed once they took control of the country. Going back, I'm going to look at the comments here. Al, yes, the comments were pretty disgusting, and people are pushing back. So yeah, there's a lot there. It's crazy. So speaking of Oreshnik, there was the Russian bloggers have noted that there was a lack of damage. Now Russia has claimed that actually there were no warheads in the Oreshnik that was fired, and that this was done specifically to as a message. The fact that they didn't hit the target that they were actually aiming at is was noted quite extensively by Russian mill bloggers and others. There's not a lot of damage. Yes, there's still the, however heavy, I think 1.5 ton impact at Mach 11 speeds when it actually hit that terminal at its terminal phase. So even that would cause a fair amount of damage, but with no explosive payload as well, they had no real effect. They hit some sheds and some residential buildings, etc. They did hit, I think, one manufacturing plant, but the damage is not significant. So, yes, warning. Vladimir Putin, by the way, later came on and said, we have a stockpile of these, and so we are ready to use them. There's been no follow-up attack, though. It's more Russia saber rattling to a great extent. They want to scare the West and prevent them from actually responding to Ukraine, because the next one could be nuclear. Yeah, that's how it is. As Ozzy says, a message of how desperate Russia is. The missile is new. They've made 3. Cost per unit, as the numbers I saw were anywhere from 20 to 40 million. I'm kind of tending on about the higher mid range of that, 30 to 35. Yeah, I think there's a real chance there's desperation behind it. The damage was minor. It was likely carried a test device to show the flight characteristics, so they might as well drop it on enemy territory where they're at it. Going back to Sumy for a moment, this is some of the pictures of the damage thereof. Cars, a service building. This is not like this is like a vehicle service building, but it was not like a military facility. And a parking lot. It was basically a service station. More on Sumy again. Then from the Defense Intelligence of the UK, it is likely that Ukraine will see real economic growth of around 3% in 2024. This continues the trend of wartime recovery after Ukraine's economy contracted by around 29% in 2022, followed by real economic growth of 5% in 2023. 3% is pretty healthy, and it shows that Ukraine is managing to, even under the hardships of war, managed to get their industry, their economy back at least somewhat on track. Some of it's going to be spent on war material, obviously, etc. But at least it looks like it's getting back into a growth state again. Russian economy will likely grow by around 3.6%. likely being driven by government spending, but there's more to this than meets the eye. We'll talk about the economy a little bit more in just a moment. Economic growth is forecast to slow in 2025 due to pressures from inflation, labor shortages, and sanctions. Russian defense spending is expected to increase further in 2025 to account for 32% of total budget expenditures, while other areas of the budget, such as social spending, face cuts. Increased government spending will highly likely intensify existing inflationary pressures in the economy, with an annual inflation rate of 7.9% forecast for 2024. Let's go ahead and talk about the economy for just a moment now. Now, I've gotten this information over the last couple of days. A week ago, the ruble was trading just about 97 to the US dollar, and it bopped over 100 to the US dollar just a couple of days ago. This was as of yesterday, I believe it was, 107 to the US dollar. The Russian people are now joking, you don't have to worry about the budget. There will be no deficit. There will be no money, but there will be as many rubles as you want. But the Russian businesses are now preparing for even worse. They're expecting it to devalue to 120 rubles per dollar. Now, as he's mentioned, it's 114, and I've started to see that as well. The last number I had was 113, and I think I've got that on the list here. Again, this is a tremendous amount of devaluation as the ruble continues to tumble in the current circumstances. The wave of devaluation hit the market after November 21st, according to Anton Herashchenko, when the U.S. announced new sanctions against the Russian financial sector, blacklisting 6 banks, including the state-owned Gazprom Bank. The bank still retained access to the SWIFT system and euro-denominated transactions. Why did they? That's right, so they could do their supposedly regulated gas sales. Meanwhile, China has stopped accepting Gazprom Bank's Union Pay cards. Banks in Tajikistan stopped servicing Union Pay. And Mongolia, Gazprom Bank's cards of the Union payment system stopped working. Banks in UAE, Turkey, Kazakhstan all stopped servicing these Gazprom Bank cards here. Even Cyprus got in the middle of this because there are rumors that Cyprus is looking at joining NATO. Now, I've seen no official word of this happening. I've seen no unofficial word of this happening beyond what we're seeing coming from the Russian channels here. Rich Russians and Russian officials are very concerned about the information that Cyprus is allegedly planning to join NATO. It is known that many of them have assets and real estate there, and many relatives of the Russian leadership live there. That's right. If Cyprus joins up with NATO, they could find that their assets suddenly become very risky for them in Cyprus. But again, I've only seen it from the Russian side. I've seen nothing from Cyprus itself. Rosneft CEO Igor Sechin is going to classify data on Russian oil exports and the production volumes of Russian refineries, ostensibly to protect Russia's national interests from unfriendly actions by the USA and other Western countries. Likely, however, it's being classified because it looks bad. And if it looks bad, well, people who has bad information for Vladimir Putin tend to discover that they don't like the windows. And they tend to fly out those windows in an involuntary manner. Like I said, I'm just seeing it from the Russian side. I don't even believe it. I think it's more Russia, NATO fear-mongering. But again, I don't see any proof of it actually happening. If it happens, let me put it this way. If it happens, I'll be genuinely surprised. But they like to talk about it. For many Russians, the exchange rate between the dollar and the ruble has long been regarded as a key indicator of their economy. This was true in the 90s, the 2000s, and remains the case today. As this sign says, consequences just ahead. China and India buy 94% of Russian crude oil exports as of October 2024 using the illegal shadow fleet. If the West can dissuade China and India, even temporarily, Russia will likely collapse and Russian defeat in Ukraine will quickly follow. Now, the UK actually announced a new set of sanctions against the Russian shadow tanker fleet that could cause some additional issues there. The thing is that China and India, honestly, China and India at this point in time are to be considered to be other world powers, not necessarily allies. They work towards their own national interests, as most nations should. And at this point in time, they do not find it to be in their national interest to invest their own military capabilities in the West at this point in time. India does not like China. I'm not saying China and India are getting together. I'm saying the two are working for their own national interests at this point in time. And if you can get cheap oil, that sounds like it's your national interest to get a lot of cheap oil. And for Russia, well, this is going to be a long-term pay situation for them as well, because from everything I'm seeing, China is putting Russia into exactly where they want them. Pretty soon, Russia's going to have to pay China for the lethal assistance they're getting from China with land instead of money, because their money is becoming worthless. And we may soon find that China is dictating terms. Speaking of Russia's economy, continuing on, we noted a while back that the pipeline transit deal through Ukraine is not being extended, which means that 50 years of gas flows from Siberia to Central Europe are ending, which is a vital piece of revenue for Russia. Then from Mayor of Kyiv, I do not care about the graphs and the stats of the ruble value and interest rates. Just please wake me up when there are funny videos of them fighting in supermarkets. And Igor Sushko says, I thought you'd never ask. November 24th in St. Petersburg, Russia. So some videos of people fighting over things in supermarkets for you, and just in case you don't want to look at all the funny graphs. By the way, here's the ruble at 112 and the ruble at 110. I absolutely believe 114 is 100% possible. Like I said, things are not looking good. So maybe we'll see more of these videos of people fighting in supermarkets coming out soon. Now that we've talked about the Russian economy for a bit, Russian telegram channels, we're going into the news out of Russia. Russian telegram channels breathlessly reported a drone attack on Russian Bashkortostan, approximately 1,200 kilometers from Ukraine, where the Gazprom Neftekhim Salavat petrochemical plant is located. It's the largest facility in Russia. They started firing up at the drone that they saw, which then turned away. It turned out to be a Russian AN-2 that was used as a crop duster. Friendly fire. But it did, by the way, this AN-2, which has a top speed of 120 kilometers per hour, which would be about 80-ish miles an hour. It turned around and flew out. They couldn't even hit a slow-flying crop duster with their air defense systems. Pretty funny. Russian propagandist Mardon says the Oreshnik missile that they launched against Ukraine is a direct threat to European cities and U.S. Army bases, adding, these missiles are not made to be used with a conventional non-nuclear warhead. Translation, they are threatening nuclear war yet again. Let's see. I don't know what the ruble's doing versus the UAE's currency. I know that the numbers I've been seeing have been following this same general trajectory. I think I saw it was 7% down against the Chinese yuan, and 7% down against the also against the Indian rupee. I don't know about the UAE dirham. Didn't see any numbers on that, but I know that all, by and large, they're all following the exact same trajectory. A Russian soldier kept posting videos of Russian air defense as he described his days. This is the dangers of being a blogger in Russia. And everywhere he went, where he'd film and do a blog post about where he was working that day, well, a missile would soon follow. Apparently, he's lost several air defense systems in a row. As Anton Herashchenko states, "Good job, Russian soldier. Carry on." A pipe with boiling hot water burst in Russian St. Petersburg with 3 people injured. This looks post-apocalyptic, I swear. All the steam coming off that near boiling hot water just in the parking lots and roadways of St. Petersburg. There was big news that a Russian radar station for an S-400 system was hit in the Kursk region. This would be the second one I've seen recently. One of them was actually destroyed while it was under maintenance, which explains its destruction. But the other one was destroyed in active use. In fact, the video I saw of it showed air defense missiles being fired at the incoming ATACMS missiles. It was not able to save itself. An attack on Kaluga, Russia, a local oil refinery hit, once again taking out more of Russia's ability to make money. Russian passenger aviation has been suffering in marked ways. It's been about 2 years without them getting regular maintenance and service. So they're going to gradually find that more and more of their airplanes are going to be unsafe to fly, and they may continue to fly them anyway. And they'll then find that even more of their planes have breakdowns and further issues that prevent them from flying or invite them to their final destination. Russia, the word we're getting on the street is that Russians have ordered that there will be no POWs taken. So we've seen a lot more videos of Russians executing Ukrainian POWs. Often, in fact, we saw some where I saw one where the soldiers had been stripped of their uniforms and then shot naked on the ground. Shortly after that, I got another note that said that Russians wearing Ukrainian uniforms attempted a infiltration and were shot and killed. Odds are they're using those uniforms that they're stealing from Ukrainian surrendering soldiers that they've killed in order to do so. Here's another S-400 talking about the 2 launchers. This one actually destroyed the radar in the 2 launchers, as well as 5 soldiers that were involved in it. More on the Kaluga attack. I got a lot of duplicate information today. Medvedev outlined a new red line, saying that the transfer of any nuclear weapons to Ukraine would be considered an attack on Russia. Ironically, this is probably the one thing I don't think that Russia has to worry about. I don't think there's anybody in the West who's sitting there going in leadership saying that we're going to give Ukraine nuclear weapons. Ukraine can develop their own. They've got the materials, they've got the know-how that they could have a crude weapon within a few months. So the evolution of Russia's red lines. NATO cannot be moved closer to Russia's borders. NATO can be moved, but Ukraine cannot be armed. Okay, Ukraine can be armed, but Russian border villages cannot be attacked. Okay, villages can be attacked, but Belgorod cannot be attacked. Okay, Russian cities can be attacked, but entering Russian territory cannot be carried out. Okay, entering can be carried out, but attacking deep into Russian territory cannot be carried out. Okay, attacking deep into Russian territory can be carried out, but only with drones. Missiles cannot be carried out. Okay, missiles can be carried out too, but nuclear weapons cannot be transferred to Ukraine. So the evolution of the ever-changing red line. And Russia is finding that they probably should be using less red lines and more of their brains instead. Russia wants to reset the world order away from international laws applied equally to a time of great power international relations. Yes. Somebody said, in fact, I was on Twitter/X and was watching a conversation. Somebody said that the relationship between U.S. and Russia could be explained by the fact that Russia has gone back to a 19th century imperial mindset. And a pro-Russian source said, "Oh, this is all lies. Look at this. You said that the U.S. and Russia weren't even at each other's throats back in the 19th century." And I said, "Well, you're misreading this probably deliberately. He didn't say that the U.S. and Russia were at each other's throats in the 19th century. In fact, as I recall, it was actually mostly Russia and the UK that were at each other's throats. But you read that as though the U.S. and Russia were at each other's throats in the 19th century. No, he's just saying that Russia is in a 19th century imperial mindset yet again. Ozzy says the imperial mindset never left. And I would agree with that statement, but it probably was suppressed to a certain extent for short periods of time. But either way, you can't declare that somebody is lying when you misread their information, and Russia really truly needs to figure out how to not be a bunch of imperial powers. I really need to figure that out. There's in fact, my statement has always been Russia was this close to dictating terms in Europe. They almost had Europe irrevocably reliant on Russian oil. All they had to do was start marketing Russian culture, music, literature, and thoughts, their politics, and they would have had Europe eating out of their hands. In fact, they were so close to it. If they hadn't attacked Ukraine, give it another 10 years, Europe would have fallen into Russia's orbit. Not through any force of arms, but by the absorption of European culture into Russian culture. According to the Ministry of Internal Affairs, they're short almost 20% of their employees over in Russia. And when they're that short-staffed, how are they supposed to get anything done? Maybe it's like Twitter. Maybe if they cut 80% of the employees, they'll get more efficient somehow or another. But the truth is that the Soviet system does not allow them to get away with any less bureaucracy than they already have. Explosions were reported in occupied Sevastopol with smoke visible over the Black Sea Naval Academy. This was literally this morning. So we are up to current information right here. Ukraine reportedly attacked Belbek airfield and occupied Sevastopol. Pro-Kremlin media claims around 40 drones, Neptune missiles, and unidentified ballistic missiles were involved. They say they shot down 25 drones over the Black Sea and Crimea. This is shocking to me because unlike every other time where they say they shot down all the missiles, they only said they shot down 25. So that is interesting. Other sources are claiming it was Neptune and S-200 missiles. And yet others say Storm Shadow missiles were involved. Russian channels are in panic as, quote, debris is hitting targets. So overall, this is a fairly coordinated attack on airfields and locations in Crimea. So overall, it's clear that Ukraine is making the most of the use of the extra Storm Shadow missiles and the extra authorizations they've received to use these for longer and deeper strikes. Let's go ahead and talk about the international front for just a little bit. Let me kind of get my screen cleaned up so I can talk intelligently, or at least talk eloquently about it. Here's the information on the new sanctions package on the Russian shadow fleet. The sanctions are aimed at limiting the Kremlin's ability to fund illegal war in Ukraine and malign activity worldwide. I like to say that Russia's been at war with us for a very long time, and it's time we actually noticed. This is part of noticing. Russia's shadow fleet has been getting around sanctions for some years now. It's time to crack down on that as well if we're serious about Ukraine winning this war. The Russians summoned the British ambassador to the Foreign Affairs Ministry, where they then proceeded to not that word, that's the wrong word. Expel, there we go, that's the right one. Expel the several diplomats that they claimed were involved in spying operations. considering the way Russians use their own embassy and personnel, probably ought to start expelling a whole lot more from the Russian embassies. According to The Guardian, Kurt Campbell, the U.S. Secretary of State, said China hasn't weighed in directly to criticize Russia, but we do believe that the increasing coordination between Pyongyang and Moscow is unnerving them. And I can see this absolutely. China's kind of thought of Pyongyang as their own little attack dog, their barking little chihuahua that they use to annoy the West and get what they want. And now all of a sudden, the Chihuahua's working for Russia. And ironically, it's almost like the Chihuahua's actually in charge. And it could upset a whole lot of the carefully balanced operations that China's been carrying out against Russia. But all in all, they don't like the looks of it. If Moscow launches a wave of cyber attacks against NATO members, millions of people could find themselves without electricity. Pat McFadden said no one should underestimate the Russian cyber threat to NATO. Now, this is where we get into something I have a fair amount of information on because I am an old school IT person from way, way back. And I'm sorry, any system that is, actually, I'm not sorry at all about this. Any system that is connected to the public internet is by nature not secure. I don't care the VPN. I don't care the security arrangements you have. I don't care the firewalls. If you can get to the public internet from your private network, you cannot believe that your network is sufficiently secure against a determined foreign state actor, period. Therefore, all the utilities that have attached their equipment to the internet so they can monitor their power plant in Brussels from a command center in Paris, well, that is a security hole. That is an opportunity for malicious actors to hack into those systems, to change parameters, to adjust, even just adjust your ability to monitor it, to put things always in the green zone, but while allowing a valve to stick open or allowing things to happen. And this is how you destroy a power plant without ever stepping inside of it. You let it destroy itself. That's the risks that they're facing if Russia makes a determined effort to hack and attack infrastructure anywhere in the world. Sewage systems, all that stuff backing up into homes, power systems, water treatment systems. If your stuff's attached to the internet, it is by nature insecure, no matter how many layers of firewall and VPN and anything else you think you've attached to it. So, rant over. Sorry. Aussie states many people overestimate the People's Republic of China's control of North Korea. Beijing can talk with Pyongyang, but North Korea does its own thing. That's true. They do. And it's clear that they thought they had more control than they did. Bloomberg writes that Turkey is negotiating with the U.S. to lift some sanctions against Russia because Turkey wants to continue paying Gazprombank for Russian natural gas imports. Russia is Turkey's largest gas supplier, accounting for 42% of imports this year. Turkey better get off the ball and start, better get on the ball and start getting alternate sources. Scholz, the German chancellor, is trying to spin his conversation with Vladimir Putin, saying he had urged the Russian president to end the war and withdraw his troops from Ukraine, and not to hope for a decrease in Western support for Kyiv. I'm not sure I believe it, just because Scholz is, as of right now, in the middle of effectively an election for his job. He's fighting for his job again. There are new German elections taking place, kind of snap elections in February. And he's got to say the things that are going to get him reelected again. So I don't know that I believe it, but it is what he said. Oh, Al. DOS-based system. I miss DOS. I can't even tell you how much I miss DOS. Simple, straightforward, single user. Of course, now you can connect DOS to TCP/IP networks. So, But yeah, I get what your point is. Half the time you can't even find somebody who can run it anymore. Germany has announced it will hand over Iris-T short and medium-range air defense systems to Ukraine before the Christmas holidays. Merry Christmas, Ukraine. 38 Shahed drones violated the airspace of Belarus over the past day. This is as of 2 days ago. It is claimed that only 9 Russian drones have been confirmed to have returned to Ukrainian airspace, indicating that 29 of them crashed or otherwise impacted in Belarus itself. Russia ought to be careful because at this point they're going to start a war with Belarus. Now, people are theorizing that electronic warfare messed them up and sent them to Belarus. I mean, it's better than some of the other places that could be sent. Polish farmers are saying they're going to block the Ukraine-Poland border in December. I have my concerns about the Polish farmer protests, but I'm not going to make comments on it because I don't know the politics over there in Poland that well. So I hope they don't. I'll just put it that way. Scholz has outlined his position on Ukraine following his new candidacy for chancellor. He emphasized his support for financing aid to Ukraine, but opposed supplying it with Taurus missiles and authorizing deep strikes into Russia. In other words, no change from what he was doing before, which has resulted in the elections coming up in February. Now we get into rumor territory for a little bit here. Le Monde reported that France and Britain are discussing deploying troops to Ukraine. The talks aim to form a core European alliance to support Ukraine and ensure broader security. The idea of Western troop deployment is not off the table. It has gained momentum in recent weeks, according to the outlet. However, Britain's foreign secretary straight up said the UK will not send troops to Ukraine. Dead stop. Despite reports of a potential UK-French venture, they reiterated the UK's long-standing position to support Ukraine with training, not boots on the ground. Then he added, at this time. Make of that what you will. The European Union and the United States allocated $112 million to DTEC to restore energy infrastructure. They had previously financed $1.2 billion in repairs, with Russia having destroyed 90% of their generating facilities. This information popped out then, and it might explain the sudden bounty of Storm Shadow missiles showing up in various reports here. The UK secretly delivered dozens of Storm Shadow missiles to Ukraine weeks ago when Ukraine started running low on the long-range missiles. These shipments were not publicly announced, but somehow or another somebody got it out anyway. But it was weeks ago, so interesting to see. Kazakhstan aims to boost oil exports through the Baku-Tbilisi-Cayhan, I'm not sure how to pronounce that, pipeline, targeting 1.5 million tons in 2024, with plans to reach 20 million tons annually in the future. This would reduce the more than 80% share of flows it currently sends via Russia. One more spot where Russia loses out on the money. This might also be why we see Russia getting pretty aggressive in those areas, trying to expand their direct influence to see if they can, shall we say, intercept those opportunities. White House has said they would like $24 billion for 2025 to cover military expenditures for Ukraine. In fiscal year 2025 continuing resolution, including $8 billion for weapons to Ukraine and $16 billion to refill U.S. inventory. Then this poll was put out by the Kyiv Independent, with 51% of Americans now opposed to aid to Ukraine. This makes it a literal split, and we'll have to see if that number switches around. But what I'm seeing, I think what we're seeing is the results of the election. On people like Joe Rogan and on Don Trump Jr., et cetera, like that, making very negative remarks about Ukraine. The question, though, I keep seeing is there's a lot of positive reasons to be coming out of the Trump administration, the future Trump administration so far, but I'm not going to make predictions. I think this is what we're seeing, though, is that the results of the election has resulted in this pretty much dead down the middle split. We'll have to see if that lasts. Now, moving outside of Ukraine and Russia for just a little bit here, Israeli authorities have approved a ceasefire agreement with Lebanon, which came into force this morning. And I thought this was pretty interesting because, well, it's Hezbollah, not Lebanon. Well, the whole situation over there is pretty crazy. Lebanon is the government. Hezbollah has basically driven the government forces out of sections of Lebanon, or has taken control of enough of the government to displace the government in these roles. Well, Israel has now managed to weaken Hezbollah enough that the Lebanese government is saying we can come back in and take control of these places now, which is a lot of what I think is going on here. Joe Biden did comment on the ceasefire. Both countries have adopted the agreement, and it took effect at 4 a.m. this morning, local time, not here. The Lebanese army began heading south to secure southern Lebanon and prevent Hezbollah from rearming, and they're taking their country back from the Iranian regime, because remember, who backs Hezbollah? Israel and Lebanon approved a ceasefire to end the war in Lebanon on November 26th. This ceasefire and its terms are a tantamount to a Hezbollah defeat. So we now have Hamas being defeated on the south, Hezbollah on the north. They just had to kick over the hornet's nest. And Israel said, well, it's time for we pull out the bug spray. Hezbollah has abandoned several previously held ceasefire negotiation positions, reflecting the degree to which IDF military operations have forced Hezbollah to abandon its war aims. Israel has accomplished its war aim through 2 months of military operations in Lebanon and this ceasefire. Hezbollah claimed incorrectly that it defeated Israel. The decision to rely on the Lebanese armed forces and UN observers in Lebanon to respectively secure South Lebanon and monitor compliance with the ceasefire agreement makes no serious changes to the system outlined by UNSC resolution, which ended the 2006 Israel-Hezbollah war. The difficulties in implementing this deal mean that Hezbollah and Iran can recover from this setback if the United States and Israel fail to prevent Hezbollah and Iran from doing so. So look at it like this. It's an opportunity either to permanently crush Hezbollah, or it's an opportunity for Hezbollah to rearm for later operations, according to the Institute for the Study of War. Ozzy, you're having some trouble today. As part of the TAIF Accords ending the Lebanese civil war, all parties agreed to disarm. Hezbollah ignored that and has been powerful enough to get away with it. The Lebanese army is low standard and low motivation. Yeah, pretty typical of government forces in a country in that area. Now let's talk about NATO for just a moment or two. The NATO Parliamentary Assembly has called for Ukraine to be provided with medium-range missiles. These could be ballistic missiles with a range of 1,000 to 55 kilometers, including Tomahawk missiles, which can strike at the enemy's strategic depth. NATO's Admiral Van Dier urged Europe to reform its defense strategies by cutting bureaucracy, increasing spending, and embracing innovation in space, IT, and logistics. He stressed adopting riskier, faster approaches like the U.S., raising budgets to 3% of GDP, and addressing challenges from Russia. Translation: Europe needs to stand up on its own 2 feet, set up its own manufacturing, get serious about its defense industrial base, get the products, designs, and capabilities out there as quick as possible, take riskier approaches so that they can get and field real military hardware tomorrow instead of perfect conservative items in 6 years. So get serious, Europe, is what they're basically saying. Then there was this bit that came across my screen. I thought it was kind of poorly phrased here. NATO is discussing the possibility of preventive precision strikes on Russian territory if a conflict with the aggressor state breaks out. The key piece is the second part, if a conflict with the aggressor state breaks out. Well, the Russians absolutely ran with this, saying that NATO's claiming they're going to preemptively strike our stuff without us doing anything at all, that they're going to destroy our production facilities and infrastructure before we even do anything. Well, no, they aren't. The actual statement is that if war breaks out with Russia, that they need to be prepared to destroy Russia's ability to make war immediately. Not wait for the moment when all of that hardware crosses NATO borders, goes in and is actually used to strike and attack. They can't act defensively in that regard once a war is happening. He emphasized that NATO could use weapons against Russia only if it attacked one of the alliance states. Moving on to basically news out of the front lines, but they've got a bunch of different areas I'm going to touch on. Syrskyi announced a new counteroffensive by the Ukrainian armed forces, stating that the situation in Pokrovsk and Kharkiv directions have stabilized but remains challenging, with enemy forces outnumbering Ukraine 5-1 in Pokrovsk. Now, they actually announced the previous counteroffensive as well. That happened when they went into Kursk, but they didn't announce it was going into Kursk. So I'm watching this. There's a lot of theories surrounding this. Ukraine's commander-in-chief, General Syrskyi, hinted at an impending counteroffensive. If this is real and not a feint, I'd expect another Kursk-like invasion in Russia, but in a different region. Bryansk? Possibly. Or it could be a counteroffensive in some other area of the front that's been otherwise quiet and represents an opportunity for Ukraine to make some real gains. We'll see. New counteroffensive has been announced, though. Let's talk about the front lines themselves. It's been a little bit since I've been able to get into the front lines, so I'm going to back this up to about... Come on. There. The 19th, we can see that this is the extent that Ukraine held in the Kursk region. We move forward a little bit. Now, this is just 2 days later, and you can see that that there's the kind of the salients had been cut off on both ends here, south and north, and then it pretty much has stayed the same since then. This just represents the aggressive attacks that Russia is making in those areas, wave after wave after wave. They've rolled in about 50,000 troops, plus another 10,000 North Koreans to try and retake this area from Ukraine. No change up here in the Kharkiv area. A little bit of changes over here near Karazova. Just a little bit of an expansion of the areas that Russia has control of. Moving south a bit here. I don't think there's any changes here in the last day or so. Nope. Okay, yeah. And we'll look at the Chasiv Yar area here. You can see there is an expansion of the gray zone that happens right here, indicating that the Russians are making some pretty heavy attacks into this area. Likely they have taken control of these types of areas, but we're still watching this carefully. The real changes are happening more south than that. Over here near, let's go to near Saladova. We'll get this better framed here, get it right about there, and you see just a whole bunch of small advances all across this area here. Not good news for Ukraine. I mean, just that simple. Not good news for Ukraine down here. Same thing about near Makarivka here. You can see the Russians are trying to encircle or expand their control pretty much everywhere they can across this area of the front. So effectively, you got 3 areas of main action near Kurahova and Makarivka. The smaller area near Zaharzova, and of course in Kursk itself. So we're watching all 3 of these areas plus the rest of the front lines. There's word that there might be something new happening in the Zaporizhia area, but I've not seen anything happen yet. The Russians are claiming they've made more gains, but we'll see. I'll watch. Russia launched a record number of 188 Shaheeds and other drones against Ukraine in a single night on November 26th. Russia's trying to create new records each day. The moment when 5 ATACMS missiles struck the airport of Kursk, you can see the Russian S-400 air defense battery was present, which you can see firing and during the videos. But the U.S.-made missiles mercilessly struck the Russian airport and, quote, its red lines. So all the way in the back there, you can see that batch of strikes in there. The Russians did confirm the attack of using ATACMS missiles on the Kursk region. They said they indirectly admitted that an S-400 system was damaged, with one of the missiles reached its goal. They used this as evidence that they shot down an ATACMS missile. This is merely the rocket stage. This is what you'd have attached to the deployment part of it, the actual warhead, where it would deploy hundreds of submunitions. Hitting this or seeing this on the ground is expected because it doesn't blow up in flight. The little submunitions get deployed, and this would fall in the area where it would ballistically fall. I mean, this doesn't prove anything one way or the other, just that an ATACMS strike was made in the area. This video is kind of short and interesting here, but I'm going to just quickly link it to you. I'm just kind of trying to move through some of this information pretty quick. They're talking about spending 3 weeks fighting complete encirclement and having to pull out. Their 8 men fought against double and triple that number, constantly attacking on a regular basis. They managed to get everybody out but 1. So rough times. He does share some of the fight there and talk about it. So absolutely you want to watch that when you get a moment. Zhorhova direction is the toughest on the front, according to Zelensky. In Zaporizhia, a threat exists, but our defense forces control the situation. In the Kursk operation, our troops defend positions and inflict heavy losses on Russia. They're the 3rd Company of the 2nd Mechanized Battalion, 3rd Separate Assault Brigade, cleared Kupiansk and captured 7 occupiers from Russia's 1st Tank Army. A lot of this area, the Russians are basically getting a couple of guys in here, and then they do another assault to get another couple of guys through in. And the Ukrainians are able to go in there and pick up and clean up the untidy parts and capture the soldiers in question. The Russians recently put up their flag in this village, but the Ukrainians have effectively retaken it. More on the airfield in Kursk. I'm going to go ahead and give on past that. Russian blogger complains that the vast majority of Russian assaults involving infantry and equipment are being destroyed by Ukrainian drones before even reaching Ukrainian positions, despite the reported manpower issues within Ukraine's armed forces. They don't have enough electronic warfare systems. More on Kurahova. The situation is seriously deteriorating in Kurahova. Russian troops have almost reached the center and in addition have crossed the highway south after taking over Dani. The situation near Kurahova looks not good. Russian source Wargonzo basically confirms this, although they claim there have been tactical successes in Zaporizhia that I'm not seeing reported anywhere else. Donetsk, they talk about Velika Novosilka. There is a lot of stuff going on there, and they have made some gains in that area. Korohovo, they also talk about forming a pocket there. Chasov Yar, no significant changes to the lines of control, but there is a lot of fighting. And Kursk, mainly counter battles continue. The Ukrainian armed forces are actively counterattacking and bringing up reserves. So that's kind of the Russian perspective on the situation. The 3rd Assault Unit cleared. This is the one I mentioned earlier when I showed the soldiers having taken some people from the 1st Tank Army. And this is just some more of this. But they mentioned that these soldiers have already been convicted of crimes. And they're basically being sent to the front as cannon fodder. And now they're getting captured again. A lot of those changes here kind of are being represented. The Russian forces are said to have made a small crossing over the Oskil River, but they're not concerned about it just yet. Something to watch, though. We're going to be watching that one. Russian forces continue advancing near Velika, Novosilka, and Toretsk, but nothing drastic after the other day. So again, things are stabilizing to some extent, but there's a lot of challenging stuff going on. The Institute for the Study of War kind of summarized this whole thing as Russian forces continue to make significant tactical advances in western Donetsk Oblast and are coming closer to enveloping Velika Novosilka and advancing towards important Ukrainian ground lines of communication, supplying the rest of western Donetsk Oblast and running into eastern Dnipropetrovsk and Zaporizhia Oblasts. Basically, what we just went over on the maps. Their perspective on the same information right here. Now, Kupiansk is an interesting thing. The Russians had managed to push into Kupiansk, and within 48 hours, they were being pushed right back out of it. They cleared Kupiansk of Russian armed formations. Ukrainian forces have pushed back Russian troops from Kupiansk in Kharkiv Oblast and maintained control over the situation on the town's outskirts, according to Nazar Voloshin, a spokesperson for the Krychia group of forces. So basically, the Russians made an assault into Kupiansk, and Ukrainian forces rounded them up and kicked them right back out. But residents of Kupiansk are kind of bracing for the worst out of this whole thing. The fact that the Russian forces managed to push in at all was a concern. But again, the city is now back under fully Ukrainian control. The question is going to be, can Russia push back in again? Russian mill bloggers report that their forces withdrew from Kupiansk and were not, in fact, kicked out, but they did call the attempt to capture the city a, quote, disgrace. We'll see. And a couple of notes about Pokrovsk here. The Russians have occupied the remaining part of Khyrovka and are moving north of the river. They occupied most of Petrivka and are on their way to Pustinka, where they've also occupied Zoria. They also secured the road north of Sontsivka. It is expected that an attack towards Sevchenko Stary Terny is next, forcing Ukrainian units to abandon positions south of the reservoir due to the possibility of being surrounded. So they got a lot of stuff going on in that area. Definitely a challenge for Ukrainian forces at this time. And that's the situation on the front lines. You got your broad overview and some of the details from the various fronts. I got some interesting extras for you. Let's go and dive on into it. Here's an evacuation of a wounded soldier taking place as mortar shells fall practically on top of the team. They're not even fazed by it. And to be honest, at that point in time, once it explodes, it's too late to be fazed by it. You might as well keep walking. Because if it was going to kill you, you'd already be dead. How about a soldier in a dugout sleeping with a cat? I'll let that just leave as it is right there. Defense Intelligence of Ukraine did a video kind of showing off the process of launching Luti drones, which are used to attack Russian military targets, with each drone carrying 75 kilograms of explosives and a range of up to 2,000 kilometers. That gives them quite an opportunity to drop about a 150-pound bomb on a lot of places across Russia. This Ukrainian defender, and I'm going to just let this play as I talk here, single-handedly repelled a Russian assault unit consisting of 6 soldiers. The firefight's pretty intense if we watch this. Let me see if I can make this larger. I gotta kill the audio though, because who knows about the copyrighted nature of the music. But you can see there's 6 Russian soldiers in that trench line there, and the Ukrainian is just sitting in what looks like a shell crater at this point in time. He manages to push back at them with automatic fire, and pushes the Russians out of the area and repels them, so they run away. How about scooters? If you look closely, one of them's underneath my head here. Let's see. Russians are now assaulting on scooters. And I'm not talking about the sit-down kind with the 105 millimeter thing that the recoilless rifle that the Italians, I think it was, made. No, these look like they're just literally those little electric scooters that you can stand on and ride. That's a real high-tech mechanized assault right there. Then there's this one. Let me pop this one up to full size here, muted again. A sapper was working on a road. He sees a vehicle coming. He tries to wave them down. This Russian sapper tries to wave them down because there's mines in the road. And they don't stop. They don't even slow down. They just hit him with the vehicle, and he collides out of the way. And then, kaboom, they hit the mine. Maybe if there's an explosive ordnance disposal tech in the road, you might ought to maybe stop for a moment or two. Just saying. This one caught my eye, and I'd laughed hysterically over it. Well, not really, but I laughed pretty good over it. Unfriendly countries according to Russia. On the top. Countries where you can drink the tap water on the bottom. A lot of overlap in those two maps. Just saying. From Alexander Jokic, I think that's how you pronounce that. Putin has already lost the war is not a useful narrative in this stage of the war. While it's true that Russia has suffered significant losses, larger than any after World War II, that its economy has been set on the wrong path and that it doesn't occupy major Ukrainian population centers, the war can still be ended with an unfavorable peace, both for Ukraine and Europe. Russia doesn't need to occupy Kyiv in order to create a framework in which Ukraine will be turned into a satellite state, or to put it more simply, placed under Russian control. An independent Ukraine must keep its ties with the West, both economic and security-wise. It must have a strong army for defense. Detaching Ukraine from the West against the will of the majority of the nation and cutting its army in size were the main demands of Russia since the beginning of the war. Giving the Russian language an official status and returning all the symbols of Russo-Soviet imperialism to Ukraine are additional demands, but not the fundamental ones. Only a Ukraine which cannot defend itself and is left without allies or an alternative model of integration can be turned into a Russian government once more. All the Pushkin and Lenin statues are merely a symbol of submission. The actual framework of accomplishing that goal is more important. As such, Putin has not yet lost the war because the end of the war will be political and not military in nature. Ukraine continues to fight for its independence and is forced to fight until it secures the terms of peace, which will provide such a framework as to ensure its independence. This remains Russia's main goal. If they can't absolutely capture Ukraine, they want to turn it into a satellite state that cannot protect itself from Russian aggression or Russian political operations. By the way, we like to talk about red lines being drawn and all this kind of thing. I thought this was interesting. In a late 2022 meeting in the Oval Office, Blinken and Sullivan suggested warning Russia that if it did not stop shooting missiles and drones at civilian targets, the U.S. would provide Ukraine with ATACMS. Biden resisted, worried about how Russia would react, and he only relented partially nearly a year later. Ukrainian leaders have repeatedly complained that America's habit of saying no when asked for advanced weapons, only to say yes a few months later, makes the weapons less effective than if they were sent when initially requested. Inside the administration, the Ukrainian requests have often opened divides, with Blinken and the State Department frequently more comfortable granting them than Biden or the Defense Department. State Department officials have at times said they are confident Putin's threats are a bluff. The intelligence community, they contend, tends to raise alarms about dire consequences if Ukraine gets more assistance, but then when the aid has actually been provided, those scenarios have failed to materialize. This is an indictment of President Biden's Ukraine policies. And this is where really the rubber hits the road. I can only think of one time where we said to a nation that if you don't surrender now, we're going to unleash havoc on you in a way that you will have never seen before and cannot understand. And that is when the U.S. was just short of dropping an atomic bomb on Japan. What they're saying here is that by telegraphing our intentions effectively in advance, opportunities are lost to shorten this war. Instead, that material should show up, and then when it's been used on the battlefield and has been maximally effective, and Russia throws a fit, we go, "Oh, our bad, we didn't say that. We didn't manage to mention that, did we? Sorry about that. I guess you're going to have to deal with the consequences there, aren't you?" Instead, they have time to pull their most valuable equipment out of range. Here's a U.S.-made M2A2 Bradley rolling through Russia somewhere in the Kursk region. The Bradley continues to be, I think, one of the best reviewed armored fighting vehicles being in use in Ukraine. I'm sure there are others that are better, but the Ukrainians really like the Bradley. How about Ukrainian Air Force Su-24 Russian fighter bomber there, tactical bomber, cruising above the clouds over western Ukraine? They have fired dozens of Storm Shadow and Scalp cruise missiles into Russian-held territory, scoring numerous hits on high-value Russian targets. And this is high enough above the clouds. It should tell you the state of Russia's air defenses, that they're not able to intercept in this, even a aircraft flying so high. Officers of the Defense Intelligence of Ukraine conducted an evacuation of 15 cats and kittens from Snake Island. This was done because the approach of cold weather complicates the carefree life of numerous cats and kittens living on Zminy Island. The cats were taken to one of the largest animal shelters in Ukraine. Once again, always amazed that they will take the time and a minimal investment in resources to help the animals. Just amazing to me. Let me see. Yes, this will be the last thing I share today from United 24. Let me start it over and turn the sound on.
And yet, in the midst of all this darkness, I see some people who will not be bound. I see some people who will not give up, even when they know all hope is lost. Some people who realize that being lost is so close to being found.
And on that note, thank you for joining me today. Always glad to have you here. The conversation and the information you guys bring from other sources is wonderful, and I appreciate every bit of it. Thank you. You guys have a great rest of your day, and we'll see you again soon. Good night, or good morning, because it's morning here. So have a good one.